All right, welcome to the vlog. I was here chatting with Mr. Dan and I was having a wonderful time and I thought, why don't we hit the record button? So super delighted today to have Dan with me. I feel really lucky, so really thank you very much. And what I know of you is that you have almost 30 years of Kenpo training, or you correct me if I'm wrong. And also you run one of the most fascinating vlogs or YouTube channels out there for me called Art of One Dojo. So I'm going to pass it on to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll delve into some of these martial arts journey topics.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. It's actually one of my favorite things about doing this channel is meeting new people like you and anyone who just wants to learn more and just wants to keep spreading the word of the martial arts. So this is actually fun. So I definitely appreciate you having me on today. As far as my Kenpo journey, this is about my 28th year, I think, since I started. It was back in '93. Um, it's just, yeah, I mean, it's been a very interesting journey. I would say it's kind of funny. In my observation, people who study Kenpo either stick with one version of it their whole life or they bounce around. And I'm one of those who've bounced around because we've had a lot of different transitions. I started in '93. I was always interested in karate as a kid, watching the Karate Kid films, Ninja Turtles, you know how kids get excited about it. And I asked my parents about it, and then one day we moved down to Florida in '93, and my parents came up to me with an ad in the newspaper just saying, "Hey, here's some karate classes. You want to give it a try?" I'm like, "Sure." I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know anything about Kempo. I didn't even know at that time, I was 14. I didn't even know there were different types of karate. I just thought it was karate and kung fu. I thought that's all there was out there. So took my first trial class. Um, it was a one-on-one. The instructor kind of gave me a little bit of a taste of what we were going to learn. He had me do a little bit of pad work, introduction, and then the next day I went to a normal class and I just fell in love with it right away. I loved the structure of it. I loved learning. I loved kicking as a kid. All the pad work was fun. And then did that for several years. And we started, it was a version of Tracy Kempo, which is an offshoot of Ed Parker, American Kempo. And we did that for about 3 years, 4 years before he switched the system over to Ed Parker. And that was my first real taste of transition because we all froze at our belt levels. Now was red belt at the time, which is about first degree belt. It was one belt away from black belt. So I kind of froze and we started over with new material. And at first I was frustrated and like, what's going on? It's been like 3 years, I was almost there. But then I started to see the new material and I liked it better. And so he started teaching us at Parker Kempo. And over the course of the following year, he actually, those of us who were close to our black belt, he actually let us dual train in both curriculums. So he let us finish up the Tracy part, at least what we had in the school, while learning the Ed Parker stuff. And then in '97, I tested for my first degree black belt. And we just continued on with Ed Parker Kempo for a couple of years. Then we moved locations. He moved locations a lot. During the third location, it was 2002, I believe. There was a little bit of controversy with the school. He got in trouble with having a relationship with an underage student. So that was fun. The school got shut down for a little bit. And I'm like, my first thought was, what's going to happen? Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And it turns out one of our assistant instructors from back in '93 and '94, he came back and bought out the school and he took it over. So we switched over to, we were still doing American Kempo, Parker Kempo, but now we were doing the Jeff Speakman version of it, which it was kind of unofficially called 4.0 at the time. It was a revamped version. So once again, I started back at the beginning, back to white material, worked my way up, started in the forms again. And then he went to the military and the school shut down. And I was like, uh-oh, now what do I do? And there were a few Kempo schools in the area, but everybody was a little bit different. And this was what I call my martial arts renaissance. These 2 years from 2005 to 2007, I was on my own, and I'd reach out to other instructors, and I'm like, who do I go to? There's a guy up in Orlando who's 3 hours away. I'm like, but that's a bit of a commute. And there wasn't any online training at this time either. YouTube was just getting started, like it had just launched, so there wasn't a lot of video material out there yet. Thankfully, my instructor had dumped off a whole bunch of DVDs for me of his collection. So I just watched through some of that. And I was getting frustrated because I'm like, all right, I'm trying to learn my material. We learned it this way. The videos are showing me this way. Websites are showing me this way. I'm like, which way is the correct way? And over those 2 years, I started to realize that they're all the correct way. Even though they're doing the moves differently, they're all following the same rules. So being a kid, being younger, and my instructor talking about the principles and concepts, I didn't want to hear that. I was 14. I wanted to kick pads. I wanted to spar. I didn't want to know about, gravitational marriage, or I didn't understand a lot of that. And this was my moment where I started to register, like, oh, that stuff's important. That's the backbone of the system. So I started to realize that every school does it their own way, and it's fine as long as they understand what they're doing, why they're doing, and they're following the same basic rules and principles. So then 2007, at the end of the year, my instructor came back and reopened the school again. And of course, once again, I started, but now we were doing Kenpo 5.0, which is Just Beekman's new revamp version. So he gave me all the whole new set of DVDs with curriculum. He started working me with the material, and I started once again over from white belt, worked my way all the way back up. And in 2008, which was 11 years since my first degree black belt, I finally got the test for my second degree black belt. And then we did that for a while, and then he just started doing his own mix. He started adding BJJ and MMA into the school. He started training amateur MMA fighters. So that was an interesting experience. So we would do Kenpo first, then he would have his MMA classes after, and I would stay and spar with some of the guys, and great fighters, man. I mean, MMA guys, they're no joke. And it got to the point where it was almost a joke. It was like I'd walk into class, I'm like, all right, well, what version of techniques do we have this week? Because he kept revamping, like one technique, blinding sacrifice. It's a whole sequence. You go, if someone comes at you with like for a choke, you spread the arms, you poke the eyes, you strip the arms down. It's really complicated. He's like, well, today we're doing it this way. I poke, strip the arms, and he did a double leg takedown. Simple. I was like, okay, that's cool. But every week it was something new, and it got to the point where I wanted to continue with the Parker material and the Speakman material. So he would actually train me with the traditional stuff on the side while we would do the main classwork. So it got to the point where I realized just how fluid the martial arts could be. It's not just one, it's not just a sheet of paper. This is it. This is your system. It was understanding the motions, understanding the rules and the principles, and why things change, how they can change, and how to implement those changes. So he finally closed the school and moved up to North Carolina in 2015. So as far as Kenpo goes, I train locally with a lot of my old colleagues. I've got a good friend, Sensei Alex. He holds open mats once a month. We go to his school. And after a while, in 2018, three things happened. One, my father passed away. Two, I decided to kind of get back into the martial arts, because I was still doing it, but it was kind of on the back burner. And I realized, you know what, that always centered me, that always balanced me. Let me go back to my roots. I started pulling out all my old Kenpo material again. I started to revamp it again. And then the third thing was, actually still part of the second thing was, I'm like, I want to add a new art into this. I had a little taste of MMA, a little taste of BJJ. I've got 1,000 different versions of Kenpo. Let me see what else is out there. So I was looking around for Judo. I'm like, Judo's is in Kenpo, parts of it. So let me see if I can take, whatever Judo has, I want to add on to it. So I actually found a local jiu-jitsu school that also teaches Judo. It's kind of a combined system, and loved it. The instructor, I spoke with him on the phone. He invited me in. I went there with the intention of just watching the class. He sat with me for an hour and we just chatted. We talked about our journeys. He talked about his school, what he teaches, and then invited me to jump on the mat with him. And it was a great experience. I felt completely welcomed, and been doing that for 3 years now. And what's weird is I love this part of my journey because it's hard. It's so different from what I learned. The principles themselves are different. Like in Kenpo, you don't turn your back to a person. So trying to learn the throws, grabbing a person and turning was such a foreign feeling to me. And I'm still struggling with it because it doesn't feel natural, but I like it. It's a challenge. But when I do understand something, I realize how well it meshes. And every once in a while, he'll show us a jiu-jitsu takedown or technique. I'm like, oh, we did that in Kenpo. So I kind of start to see where things overlap. And so the third thing that happened that year was my partner, Zach, and he's white belt Zach in the channel in some episodes. We decided to do this channel. And so I'm like, so you know what? This is a great opportunity. I'm back in the martial arts. I'm already exploring. I'm going outside my boundaries. I'm challenging myself. I want to learn new material. So we thought this was a great chance to let's see what's out there, and let's put together some presentations and share whatever we find. Let's share it with everyone else and share journeys and help people on their journeys. Because I would have loved a channel like this back in 2005 when I was on my own, when I had to go find my own resources. So we wanted to make a channel that brought these resources at least at within reach of most people who might be on similar journeys.
That's fascinating. And we are going to get a little bit later into your channel. I love it. I think it's one of the most respectful, open-minded channel out
Thank
there.
you.
You tackle all topics, and it's not about defending one system versus another, not either directly or indirectly. So we're gonna get into that in a minute. But a couple of things you said when you were describing your really thorough and fascinating martial arts journey. First of all, with Kenpo, I do want to say this for the listeners. In my vlog, I don't typically talk too much about my own background because I try to stay away from it. I have this fear of creating divisions, but I want to get more into Kenpo because it is my background. And many people don't know that, even though these days, some people know that I do Wing Chun and it's really my home system. I've been doing it for many years. When I was a young kid, how I got started in the martial arts was absolutely Kenpo. And I did this brand of Kenpo that we had in Spain for at least 6 or 7 years. It is my foundation. And I have to say that even though, we have katas and we have techniques, when we did a lot of freestyle sparring, and not once did the teacher crystallize me or constrain me. When I was sparring, and I was free to express myself. And that was in the early 80s in Spain, so or mid 80s in Spain. So it gave me a tremendous foundation. Dan, there isn't almost a day that I'm training these days in my system that I don't go back to lessons I learned back in the Kenpo system. So it's a wonderful thing. And the other thing you said is this thing about getting harder when you started judo, the fact that you wish to challenge yourself. I always say martial arts should be tough. If you're not having a difficult time with your martial arts, what are you doing? Because again, we don't use these to buy milk and fighting 27 ninjas or zombies, depending on where you live. So then might as well be challenging for ourselves. And so we are growing and developing, right? So I don't know, this is not mine. Someone else said, you're doing well in a video game because it keeps getting harder. And the same for martial arts and life, I guess. So really hats off to your courage to start an art that is so different, but at the same time, so complementary. So tip of the hat. That's I think those are lessons to highlight for the listeners right here.
Thank you.
Very good. Before we go into your channel, let's talk a little bit more about Kenpo. Two things that I'm interested. One is a little bit perhaps the history of the system itself. You've mentioned Ed Parker, tremendous figure in terms of influencing the whatever it is that the martial arts in the United States is today is in great part due to Ed Parker, whether it's Kenpo or not. So let's talk about a little bit of the history of Kenpo, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, one thing to know about the history of Kenpo is it's very divided fractures. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of different versions of history out there, if you want to say that. So part of understanding the history is learning to navigate those controversial waters. The general consensus is that Ed Parker trained with a man named James Matosi. They had a family line of his martial arts. And there's people who will debate whether Matosi really trained in Japan or China, or what he really trained. To me, it doesn't really matter so much as that he brought material to William Chow, who brought it to Ed Parker. And Ed Parker taught Chow, and there's contention there too about saying, well, Chow never wanted Parker to do this, XYZ, a lot of conjecture. But ultimately, Ed Parker learned a combination of martial arts and brought it to Hawaii. And he, from day one, whatever he learned he did that same thing. He challenged himself. So he had a proficient background in judo. He was an avid boxer. He explored a lot of different arts. He learned Kenpo. And if you read like his books, like the Infinite Oversights of American Kenpo, he talks about how he structured it. And he would, he grew up in Honolulu. He grew up street fighting. So a lot of stuff he learned, he would take and see if it worked. And if it didn't work, he threw it away. And if it did, he would rework it to the system. So he was like a sculptor with a lump of clay. He was always shaping it. From the day he started to the day he died, he was constantly changing the art. And there's different versions or different eras of Kenpo. Originally, he just called it just Kenpo Karate. And I believe that was like around the 50s. And I think at one point it was called Chinese Kenpo. And then he was teaching a system that he learned. And one of his earlier books is just called Kenpo Karate. And you look at it, if you thumb through it, you see some similarities, but it looks more like, it resembles visually more like traditional karate with a lot of the training methods. And the self-defense techniques were still self-defense techniques, but they were broken down into smaller pieces. And I believe it was around the 60s and 70s, he wanted to revamp the whole thing. And a lot of his students didn't want to go that route, namely the Tracy brothers. They wanted to continue with that, what they were learning. So there was a divide there. And some of the dirtier politics in there too is, the Tracy side of Kenpo and the Parker side of the Kenpo. There's a lot of mudslinging on both sides. And, some say, Ed Parker was never a black belt when he did this, or he wasn't, so-and-so did that, or he stole this from that. It's like, you know what? I wasn't there. I can't comment on it. This was way before I was even born. Quite honestly, I don't concern myself with it because I look at the material and what it is now, what he's done with it. And all we can do is take that baton and move forward. So he broke off and he started making what is now known as American Kenpo, and the Tracys continued their own thing. So basically they were together and they did that split. And that's why the systems are very similar, but there's still a lot of minor differences to the point where there are different systems, different versions. So Ed Parker continued to change the system. He would add techniques, he would remove techniques, he would change forms, and he brought his guys in and they all contributed. So as throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s, the curriculum grew. And it's quite a complex curriculum. So when changes happened, it could cause a lot of confusion. So there's 3 like generally accepted manuals, if you want to call them that. We kind of covered this in our history of Kenpo, but he has what was known as the 1.0 manual, and his son Ed Parker Jr. would help him write and document and put these into books. And there were 32 techniques per belt level, and the material I believe ran out at 1st or 2nd degree. Like you saw the whole system by 1st or 2nd degree black belt. And then later he decided that might have been a little too much material per belt level. So he changed to the 24 technique system, which, now the material went to 3rd degree, and that's called Kenpo 2.0. And then I do believe there was a proposal to change it to the 16 technique system. And as far as I'm aware, he liked the idea, but he didn't officially implement it. But after he passed away, a lot of schools adopted the 16 technique system, including mine. The one I went to, we did that one, which was 3.0, if you want to call it that. And so that way, so when you go to different Kenpo schools, you start to see some schools will do the 24 technique, some will do the 16 technique, some will just do their own thing. Very rarely will you come across the original one anymore, the 32. But what happened was when he passed away, all of his senior guys, he didn't leave a successor. So a lot of people tried to assume the role, and there's a little bit of a power vacuum. And there's a lot of politics within his own organization, the IKKA. So there was a lot of turbulence that happened. So basically, you saw splinters go everywhere. Like the family tree just branched out everywhere. And Jess Beekman took his material and did his own thing. Paul Mills did his own thing, and everybody did their own thing. And that's where a lot of the politics comes from. They're all, you can talk to a lot of people who say, well, I have the real version of Kenpo. It's like, well, okay, but so does he, because he learned it from Ed Parker as well. And to make things more complicated, Ed Parker would change his techniques and what he taught you based on that person. So if the person was smaller, he didn't teach them the same way as a larger person. So they learned their forms with different moves. They learned their techniques with different steps. So a lot of people feel like that's their real version. Well, it was for you. That was your version. And he was also known to change little details in the katas. So that way he put little markers in there. He'd make little changes so that later when he saw someone perform it, he knew what lineage they came from. So there's just been Kenpo is a system of perpetual change, basically, and it's still changing to this day. So now we got Jess Beekman doing his Kenpo, who went from 4.0, which he revamped things slightly, to his 5.0 system, which is quite a fantastic system. He's done a lot of it's all the principles are still there, but he's redone a lot of the techniques. He's made them more modernized. He's implemented a lot of BJJ into it, and a heavy emphasis on sparring, which unfortunately a lot of schools don't do. So if you find a Kenpo school that really focuses on principles and puts a lot of sparring into it, that's probably going to be a pretty good school. So and Ed Parker himself, he was, like you mentioned, he was such an influential figure. He really helped bring karate to America. He got Bruce Lee on TV. He started the Long Beach International Tournaments. He really brought it to the forefront of the American spotlight, where when he first came to America and he opened his first school, nobody knew what karate was. He actually has a story in his book that when he put the sign up, the neighbor next to him goes, "Karate, what is that? Some sort of Mexican food?" And he's like, "No, it's a system of self-defense." The guy says, "Good luck, you'll be out of business in a year." Well, here we are today. So love him, hate him, whatever politics people want to follow with him, you'll find every argument and every camp on every side of the topic. It doesn't really matter. He's just had such a heavy, heavy influence on the growth of martial arts in America. And I do believe he was on a genius level in the way he approaches material. There's the practical level of the system, and then there's the whole academic level. So you can spend an entire lifetime, it's like a college course. You could study the academics and the way the system, the connective tissue, your entire life, and still not get the whole thing of it. So that's what I love, that he's brought that kind of sophistication to the martial arts. And honestly, in the past 20, 30 years in America, we've seen a lot of different arts pop up, and we've seen this growth. And I think it's exciting that others are picking up that baton and running with it, and we're seeing what martial arts are becoming today.
Exactly. You know, I one of the mission statements for me in this vlog is to create unity and to emphasize the positive aspect of the martial arts. I think of martial arts, imagine this big garden with flowers of multiple colors and plants, and the beauty of it is in the variety. Who would say everything has to be red roses, otherwise the garden isn't authentic? It doesn't make sense, right? So whether one follows Kenpo or not, I don't think we'd be talking in this channel if it wasn't for Ed Parker. Like the awareness of the martial arts outside of the closed communities, unless you were in the San Francisco Chinatown being part of that community, the awareness of that is due to people like that. And Ed Parker is one of the very few that actually took it to the normal. You know, I think about today, who would not understand words like karate, right? Even if they've never practiced, and the movies and the entertainment and the associations that we have in mind. And like you said, he put Bruce Lee on TV. In that Long Beach, Bruce Lee was found by this barber who then told this producer who put him to be Kato in the Green Hornet. So who knows where we will be in history without Ed Parker. So from here, big hats off to Ed Parker. I think his mission was fundamental.
Yeah, and to play off what you just said, if you look at the 70s and 80s with martial arts films in America, what were they called? They either used the word kung fu or karate. You didn't hear the words Kenpo. You didn't really hear the words jiu-jitsu that often. You didn't, certainly not Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You didn't hear Tang Sudo. You didn't hear a lot of the art names. And that's why like karate was just a blanket term for everything, because the general person in America in the 70s and 80s didn't know much about it. So I absolutely agree. He helped proliferate that. And then he encouraged his guys to take it further. You know, he had Rainer Schulte, who took it to Europe and Germany, and he had his guys spread the art around the world. So definitely, again, love him or hate him, he was a driving force regardless.
Exactly. And now if we go even further back, and not to get into the details, because like there's going to be a lot of speculation, we don't have to, but I just do believe that it's interesting to look at the history of karate and Kenpo as connected somehow. I don't need to emphasize whether it comes from China and Kenpo was the Japanese version of the law of the fist or Chuanfa or something. It doesn't really matter. What I do believe is that there is a common origin in Japan/Okinawa. And it just probably Kenpo and karate are different, not so much in origin, but in development. But you've done karate history vlogs that I will refer the listeners if they want to know more. But if you have just maybe a few words of interest there, anything you want to say about that connection?
Yeah, that's one of the things doing this channel that surprised me was I didn't have any experience in the Japanese martial arts. You know, I didn't train in Shotokan or Kyokushin growing up. I knew of them, I heard of them, but I didn't experience them. And it was a little bit of a culture shock, because not leaving Kenpo, but exploring outside of Kenpo and other systems, I realized how different it was. Kenpo's not just karate. Kenpo's its own thing. Karate is its own thing, and each system is their own thing. And like, for example, like the Japanese terms, you don't use that in Kenpo or American, especially not in American Kenpo. We just call things forms. We never use the word sensei. We said instructor. And so going to see the formality was an interesting change. And I really like it because it feels cultural. I like the culture to it. It feels traditional. Some of the way they approach their sparring is different. We have a lot of the same techniques. You know, we have front kicks, we have round kicks, we got the same types of strikes, but the stances are different. You know, Kenpo is more neutral, more boxing-like a little bit versus the traditional deeper stances. So I do see there's a lot of commonality, especially since Ed Parker drew from a lot of sources. You know, our first kata short form 1, I do believe, is an old Chinese form that's been modified. So he kept a lot of elements in there, and I think Kenpo is more of just a mixing pot of a lot of pieces of different arts, but I find it very fascinating to go and look at those arts in their own individuality and see the differences and the way they complement, and just see how they all complement each other. So I think there's definitely a shared roots, and it's like, again, it's like that tree that keeps branching out, and eventually a tree is going to drop seeds, which is going to grow new trees, but they all came from the same source. So it's just, that's been a fascinating thing on my end, just to see and observe the similarities and grand differences from other arts to Kenpo, and just to other arts versus each other. It's just fascinating.
It's fascinating. One of the aspects of your channel that you do very, very well, with, by the way, with incredible production quality,
Thank you.
that I'm still like, that's like my model. I need to learn that, because, like, in terms of how well you produce those videos, we're gonna get into that in a minute. But just maybe to finish on systems, I do ask the guests sometime if they can tell us 3 principles of their system. Like, if you were to say, what are 3 principles, or one, if it's difficult to say 3, of your current system, what would they be?
That's a tough question, because there is a lot of principles. That's what makes Kenpo is the rules and the concepts. I mean, there's everything from, principles. We've got 3 main power principles. I'll do 2 sets of 3, if that's okay. So that I'll go
Yes,
into.
very good.
I would say these are more important ones. The 3 principles I want to say are that there's 3 phases to how Kenpo works. And the reason I want to bring this up, because a lot of misconception comes from Kenpo. People see it and they're like, oh, that looks pretty, but it's never going to work that way. Or nobody's ever going to stand there while you hit them 20 times. They are 100% correct. The problem, though, is they're observing a demonstration. They're observing part of it. There's 3 phases to learning the self-defense techniques in Kenpo. There's the first phase, which is the ideal phase. This is assuming everything goes 100% correct. That person stands there how you want, they react how that you want them to, and you're able to perform the technique. The reason we teach it that way is because the self-defense techniques are not meant to take from the piece of paper and translate directly to the street. They're not like 1-step or 3-step combinations. They are concepts. It's like when you learn a language, you have to learn the vocabulary, which are the basics, and you have to learn the grammar, which are the principles. And the techniques are a sample sentence to show how the grammar and vocabulary work together, so you understand how the words work, so that you can construct your own sentences later. Kenpo techniques are very much along those lines, as you learn how the basics work with the principles, and here's an example how this might work. And within the technique, they're not teaching you a technique to learn 20 sequential techniques. In that sequence, you're learning, well, maybe from this position, here's how we transition to this position, or here's how this strike will handle that strike. Here's an example where we're stepping off the line. There's little tiny lessons in there to extract. So yeah, a technique might look cool, but we're teaching it that way because, saying, in the perfect world, here's how it would work, to show you a demonstration of how the principles work together. The second phase is the what if phase. Well, what if something goes wrong? What if they don't step back the way you want them to? Or what if that hit doesn't work? What if you miss? Then we start exploring, well, plan B. Well, okay, well, this technique didn't quite work, but you know what? It's got a sister technique we can now go into. And then the third phase is the formulation phase. Is once you understand how the rules and basics work together, you're no longer approaching things as, oh, I'm going to go do 5 swords, or I'm going to do this technique. It's just pieces. It's like a box of Legos now. You understand how the pieces fit. You can construct and build what you need at the time you need them. So it becomes, once you start to understand how the techniques actually connect in principle to each other, and you understand why the sequences are the way they are, it becomes more freeform, and it's a lot easier to just take bits of what you want. And I'll even throw a real quick example of that. One of my favorite techniques is crossing talon. It's off a wrist grab. As it's taught, it's a difficult technique to teach. It's a difficult technique to learn. And you look at it, you're like, that's probably not going to work, because you do a counter grab, you step in and you break the elbow, you check them down, you elbow the head. It's a whole long sequence. But the thing, though, is it's teaching the concept of that arm bar. It's teaching the concept of, if you're going to do an arm bar, keep the arm against your body, put the pressure here. There's little lessons in there. And it doesn't have to be off a wrist grab. I've actually used it a few times off different, shirt grabs. So when I started doing the judo, we were doing randori one day, and I was going up against a guy who had more experience. I'm trying to judo throws, and I was getting frustrated because he was taking me down. He was taking me down to the one point. I got frustrated, and my Kenpo kicked in. I cleared one arm, and I came up underneath, and I did that counter grab from crossing talon. I stepped into the arm bar, and I did that part perfectly, and kicked his leg out. He went right down to the ground. So I didn't have to do the whole technique. I took the one lesson from that, and So I would say a lot of people who criticize Kenpo saying, "Oh, that will never work." So it's like, well, when you're seeing a demonstration, you're seeing just that one phase of it. You're seeing the teaching phase. You're looking at the textbook going, "Oh, where is the library?" Well, I'm never going to use that sentence out, anywhere. So it's along those lines. You have to understand the different phases of it. And the other three principles I think that I like to focus on is what the techniques themselves teach. Every technique has three rules it follows. And the first rule is your first step is always establishing your base. So whatever the attack is, your first step is you need your balance, you need your foundation, or else nothing's going to work. So all the techniques that have us step back or step forward, that's us establishing our foundation, our base. The second thing is you have to neutralize or deflect whatever the attack is. And then the third step is you have to cancel one of their body zones, their height, their width, or their depth. Every technique follows that in that order, or sometimes they happen together. So sometimes you could establish your base and counter in one move, but every technique has those three things, because if you don't disrupt them, you're not going to be able to defend yourself. So you got to get your balance, stop that attack, and take something away from them so that you can follow up and finish the situation.
Wonderful. And for the listeners, we did not prepare this question at all. So I threw it out there like the principles, and I'm glad you did so well. I'm fascinated with that answer. I want to take a step back because the first thing you said is at the heart of what I think we need to overcome as a community of martial arts. And this is not about Kenpo. This criticism of that would never work in a fight happens with all martial arts. And it's funny because the same martial arts that receive it issue that criticism to other martial arts. It's time to end that once and for all, right? Every combat system on earth has a training program that has exercises that don't look like fight. It doesn't matter which one. Boxing, karate, Wing Chun, Shaolin Kung Fu, they all have exercises that don't look like a fight. And they are there for the development of skill. And so, like you said, in your case, the techniques are a good way to go sample sentence. I love that you said that, because in my system, we talk about this thing we do also as vocabulary, and you have to learn it, which is what we call our forms, a way to learn the dictionary. But that would never express itself like that in a confrontation. And so when I learned, I am from Spain. I didn't grow up speaking English. How do you think I learned English? With sample sentences. Imagine someone saying, "Whoa, what a stupid sentence to practice. You're never, what are the chances that's the exact sentence you're going to have to say? Man, let me start with something. I got to develop this skill. If you see it as insurmountable, you never train anything." And again, I did do Kenpo many years. And in fact, I would argue the opposite. When I sparred in those years, it was completely freestyle. It was, by the way, pretty full contact. And it was, in my opinion, freer than I've seen many martial arts doing for all this time. So that problem didn't exist, like, because we made it work because we had to fight, So that was wonderful. Well, why don't we
I'd like to add on to that, if you don't mind.
Yes, I
So you mentioned about using it in sparring. That's another major criticism. People are like, well, how come when it goes to sparring, they, a Kenpo guy, the Kenpo goes out the window. They're just doing punches and kicks. It looks like the end of the system. It's like, well, it's still Kenpo if you know what to look for. Look at their footwork. You can recognize a Kenpo fighter based on how they're doing their leg checks. What footwork are they doing to gain and close distance? What kind of handwork? There are actually Kenpo freestyle techniques that are combinations that you see done all the time. So when people say that, oh, I never see it in the fight, it's like, well, you're just not looking, because it's definitely there. You're not going to see someone break out 5 swords, although once in a while you can pull a technique off, but you're seeing those principles implemented that are a little bit different than what you see from other systems. So if you know what to look for, it's absolutely there.
It's absolutely there, exactly. But it's always, and this is going to happen with all systems. You see, if you study animal system Kung Fu from the Shaolin, and you have a fight tomorrow with freestyle, it's going to be hard to see the exact expression of those forms. But if you look at someone who's trained long enough, you can abstract and understand at a high level that the principles they're trying to express, because that's how they develop the skill, is there. And I think we have to learn the lesson to respect each other, because it's not like this is only applicable to Kenpo. The BJJ people could be receiving the same criticism. The boxers could be receiving the same criticism. And I think we need to appreciate systems for their beauty and what they bring to people in terms of their growth. Lovely. I love what you said, and I'm going to make sure that's emphasized in this channel. And to be honest, let's go back now into Art of One Dojo. because I think that's part of what you're doing, is spreading that type of message to clarify the reason I um, got into your channel, which is how I got to connect with you. Obviously, I love martial arts, so I'm devouring content out there. And I came across yours. I don't know how, probably because the terms I used to search are used by you. But the reason is I continue listening to it is because the open-mindedness, and no matter the topic you tackle, is always respectful. You did a very difficult one, which was you did the various Kenpo systems. That was hard to do without going into this one is crazy, that one they don't know what they're doing, and this one is more logical. I looked at that as, no matter if I belong to one or the other, I'm going to have a nugget of learning in this video, and I'm being respected. So great lesson, I think, for everyone who's trying to talk and spread the message of the martial arts. You already told us a little about how you got to start with a friend of yours, but tell us more about Art of One Dojo, your mission, your goals with it.
Okay. Well, the funny thing is the channel is very different than what we thought it was going to be. Originally, what it was my background. Zach and I, we worked together. We've been best friends since 1999. We met at university. We in video production. So we've been running our own video production company since that time, and we do a lot of freelance work. So we have the camera background, we've got the editing background, and we started exploring YouTube channels back in like 2011, 12. We started playing around with it, and we wanted to offer YouTube marketing services. We're like, well, let's use YouTube to make short little videos that we can offer businesses for, like, marketing packages. But we needed to do a sample one. So we went to my instructor at the time. We're like, hey, we'll produce some videos for you. Are you game? And he's like, yeah, sure. No problem. And we came up with just a list of questions, and it was just an experiment. And we came to him one day with 20, 30 questions, and they were all meant to be like 1 minute, quick answers. And we banged out about 30 of them in one day. And we're like, we're going to release 2 a week, and we're going to try to build up the, the SEO and try to get the search results and get it going. And then we went back, we did the second series and did like 30 more. So there's like, if you look at our channel, you go way back in the content, you'll see about 60 videos that are short, little, quick answers. Not the best answers, because we kind of put them on the spot. There really wasn't any preparation to those. It was just more on the fly. But they're with my instructor, and it's like, what is BJJ? What is MMA? How many belts there are? But they're really quick, tiny answers. And it worked a little bit. He started getting a few new students from it, and we were starting to develop this package. And the channel was just starting to get a little bit of traction when he moved. And we're like, well, all right, there goes that project. So we just stopped, and we just worked on other client work. That was 2015 he left. So we did that in 2013. He left in 2015, and the channel just sat there for a couple of years. What was interesting, though, is we noticed that it was still getting activity. There were a lot of people trash talking, because he worked with a lot of kids. So he actually trained a little bit with John Hackelman, but he shaved his head to look like Chuck Liddell, and he did it for the kids. So a lot of people, make fun of that. Oh, he's trying to be a Chuck Liddell wannabe. Or there was a lot of trash talking, but there were a lot of comments saying, oh, this is great, you should make more content, we want more. And we saw that the subscribers were still going up, and we're just like, that's interesting. And Zach says, we should continue this. He goes, you've got your martial arts background. He goes, you should host it. And he goes, we should see where this goes. I'm like, okay, sure. And we said that for about a year or two, until finally we sat down to do it. But when we started the channel, our first few topics, we thought it was gonna be more along the same lines of quick answers, and let's put content out there for parents who are looking to put their kids in martial arts. So it's really more like, how do I keep my kid from being a bully, or how do I defend my kid from bullies, or how do I find a school, how, all that stuff. And we did the first batch of videos, and we realized that was not the same people who are watching. We weren't getting the parents, we weren't getting the hobbyists, we were getting serious martial artists, and we were getting lifelong martial artists and instructors who were asking for content. We realized, oh, well, we're not going this way, we need to steer the direction this way, which was actually kind of funny, because we filmed maybe 5 or 7 episodes for the first batch, and we released about 5 of them, and we realized, oh, our audience is over here, but the last 2 topics were about the kids. So we're like, we actually held those off and filmed different ones. I'm like, I don't want to do too many episodes up front about putting your kids in karate. So we actually held them off, and we peppered them in later, and we started to realize what people were looking for. And it started off the same thing. We just wanted to explore and provide answers. But when we started to see it was more serious martial artists that were interested, we tried to delve into more deeper topics. And as far as the history goes, it was actually funny. Our first one was the origin of Taekwondo. And if I could go back and redo it, I totally would, because it was done quickly. It was an experiment. I was interested in learning the history, and I'm like, you know what? Let me just throw a real quick thing. Let me just put together a quick overview video. Let me put it out there, and it took off. And I went, oh, people like that. And then people started asking, well, do history of this, do history of that. And we realized, all right, we're definitely starting to see the direction. You know, the customer's always right. You go where the demand is. So we started producing topics people were asking, and we started getting really serious questions. So we realized, all right, we have a good opportunity here to really build a good database of resources and try to unite everyone. I know the challenges I went through. You know, he studied Wing Chun, his school's close. So we know we understand the obstacles, and we understand the importance of having access to information. So we're like, well, why don't we try to be that hub, and let's be positive about it. You know, every art has something to offer, and there's way too many channels. If you want to bash an art, there's 1,000 channels you can go find. If you want to watch people beat themselves up in the parking lot, there's 1,000 channels you can go find. You know, I had criticism too. You know, we did an episode of self-defense in the parking lot, and I had people saying, well, how come you didn't just fight someone in the parking lot? I'm like, because XYZ already does it. Go watch that channel. We're trying to avoid the fight. You know, we're trying to bring concepts where you don't have to get in that situation. So our approach is we want to be respectful and positive. We want to always find the silver lining, because there always is something positive to pull from every single art out there. Whether you love the art or not, there's, like you said before, there's a nugget. And if we can highlight that nugget, we would like to do that. So going forward, that's definitely our mission statement. We want to be a resource for martial artists and for people to learn the history and appreciation, and maybe just show different perspectives of common controversial topics that people might not have considered, like, you know, what's better, traditional or MMA? It's like, well, it's not really one versus the other. Let's look at it from this angle instead. So we're always trying to change perspective and offer new views of topics, and we're trying to expand. So we want to do more history. We're starting to do more interviews. So we have a long list of topics we want to hit, and it's really been a matter of time and resources on our end to be able to do it. But yeah, we're really excited, and we think there's still a lot of potential here. We've met a lot of wonderful people, and we think that this channel is a great opportunity to propagate a more positive message about the martial arts.
That's exactly what attracted me to it. The quality shows that. I didn't know that you had a background in video production, but it shows tremendously. But just the content is amazing, and the variety of topics. I'm glad you explained a little bit, because it isn't actually easy to put out so much about so much, and be deep enough that it sounds like you're offering something. You know, there are topics like self-defense. There are topics like Chisao. There are topics like Muay Thai. There are topics like, now you're talking about martial arts and autism. So very highly recommended for the listeners. That there aren't many places out there where you're going to get that variety of information, education in a very positive way. So I love it. And the other thing I have to say that I love, sometimes when you do this for many years, you also need a little entertainment. You can have a little bit of, hey, let's talk about Cobra Kai. Let's talk about Paper Tigers. And why not? You know, it's not like everything is, you know, like has to be serious and uptight. And I love when you do those, like this Mortal Kombat analysis that you did of the two movies is actually very well researched, you know, and it is talking about Mortal Kombat. The fact that you allow yourself to go there and unapologetically a Cobra Kai fan, right, is also a great part of it. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, the movie reviews and all of that?
Yeah. Well, like I said, why not have fun with it? And that was our first Cobra Kai episode. The What Kind of Karate is in Cobra Kai was in that first batch of videos that we did when we made the channel. And it was literally like, well, let's just throw one out there, because it was already something I was investigating myself. I'd wondered for years. I had already done my research on it. I'm like, let's just throw out a fun topic. Well, that turned out to be our breakout video. And it was like, oh, people like this. So yeah, like I said, I do not apologize for being a Karate Kid fan. I am like so deeply ingrained in it, but I think it's because of, like we talked about before, how growing up with what, you know, just a blanket term of martial arts, didn't know what karate was, you know, and seeing a movie like The Karate Kid, you know, this is not a Chuck Norris character. This is not a Van Damme. This is a real representation of a kid with real everyday problems. You know, he's not fighting an army, he's trying to survive high school. And it was relatable. So yes, I like to bring that to the surface because I think a lot of these movies touch on some of our either our fantasies, or we can relate to it, or we just want to escape, or we just want to see something cool. And they're all influenced by the martial arts, like Paper Tigers. You know, there's a lot of tradition in there. You know, the whole thing, you know, being disciples and the concept of Bamo. There's still nuggets in there that relate to the martial arts. And as far as like our Cine Dojo series reviewing movies, it was funny because I started out the first couple, I don't know if you noticed, they were just like fun facts about the movie. We did Ninja Turtles, we did Mortal Kombat, we did Karate Kid, and we realized there wasn't getting a lot of traction. And it people watched it, but it wasn't getting a lot of attention until we did, which one was it? I think it was The Perfect Weapon. When I said, oh, The Perfect Weapon was the ultimate Kenpo movie. And the reason I went that route was I was having a hard time finding enough fun facts to make it interesting. I'm like, well, let me just talk about the Kenpo that's in it. That one took off. I'm like, okay. Then we did Best of the Best, the ultimate Taekwondo movie. And we focused on the Taekwondo aspect of it, and that one took off. We're like, okay, we shouldn't be focusing on movie trivia. Let's focus on how the martial arts actually play the role in these films. So that's kind of like where we've steered that one. And same thing with Paper Tigers and the Mortal Kombat. Now let's analyze it on its for its martial arts value. So yeah, so it's part, let's explore how the martial arts actually are represented in film. It's part geek nerd culture of myself, stuff I grew up with. I want to throw out there. Like I've did a couple Nintendo game reviews. It's like you said, why not? Let's throw it out there. It's the world of martial arts is so rich. It doesn't have to be restricted to what we just experienced in the dojo. It's in pop culture anyway. So let's explore its impact on pop culture. So that's, yeah, it's fun to do topics like that, and it's fun to see people react to that and see how they connect to it as well.
I love that you mentioned the video games. I have forgotten that. And when I was a kid, I one of my biggest influences was this video game Karate Champ that had the two sticks and you had to do combinations. And I love that. That was a huge influence in me. Why not the video game? And I'm glad you said Karate Kid, the movie. Because some movies like Mortal Kombat, it's entertainment value and the special effects and the outrageous aspect of some of what it does, and it's good in that context. But Karate Kid was a very realistic movie. It's actually, in my opinion, one of the best. Like you said, super relatable. The fact that they have that character that's weak, I love that. He was weak. He was skinny. He's like, man, I'm not gonna win this by sheer strength, and there's no time physically for me to get strong. I love that. It's at the heart of why many of us did martial arts.
Mm-hmm. And if you watch that film, because this is, I haven't touched on this yet in the channel, but like compared to the remake, the Karate Kid remake from 2010, if you watch the original Karate Kid, there's a scene right before the tournament where Daniel's asking Miyagi, he goes, I feel like I haven't learned enough. And Miyagi goes, I feel the same. But he goes, it's quality, not the quantity. If you watch that movie and you realize Daniel is only doing a very basic set of moves the entire time. He's in the tournament. He's just doing a quick counter punch. He's doing a sidestep round kick. He's doing the fanciest move he does is that leg takedown to Johnny. His stuff is very, very basic, but he's worked on his timing and he's perfected those few moves. Compared to the remake with Jaden Smith, he's doing all sorts of complex wushu combinations, jump spinning kicks. Like there's no way someone's going to learn that in that short of time. If you train every day for 2 months, you could realistically perfect 5 techniques if you do them over and over and over and over and over, but you're not going to perfect the whole entire curriculum. So that's what I love about the Karate Kid so much is if you really look at it from a martial arts value, it is realistic because Daniel is only using a couple of different moves, and as the movies go on, they get slightly more complicated. His timing gets a little bit better. So yeah, there's a lot of criticism that, oh, this kid couldn't be a black belt in 2 months. No, but he's perfected those 5 moves. It is the quality of what he learned. Not, he doesn't have this whole big expanse of knowledge, but you see that evolution in the films, and that's the kind of attention to detail that really drew me to it.
Exactly. What a great lesson to in the martial arts, instead of collecting techniques, focusing on doing a few things that work and growing from there. I love that lesson. And it was there in the Karate Kid. Very good point. To the
and fun fact.
What's that?
And a quick fun fact, if you watch the first film, every point Daniel scores was defensive. Anytime he tried to throw the offending move, he got countered. So the whole lesson of karate was defense only. It's kind of embedded in there slightly. Actually, it holds true with all 3 films. If you watch, every time Daniel tries to throw the attack move, he's countered. He only lands the strikes when he's defending himself.
That's wonderful. I'm gonna rewatch that just for that detail. I have not got that detail. That's one of those. Oh wow, I love it. And it is, it has to be on purpose that they're giving that message. You know, something like
I
that.
think
There's
so.
so much there. It's like when you look at Cobra Kai and all the Easter eggs that refer back to the Karate Kid. They're hard to catch because there's so many, but they're very
Exactly.
witty. They're very smart. They're very, very smart. I always say
Absolutely.
eternal credit to the producers for bringing the original actors and actresses of Karate Kid. That's another thing that's relatable to me. I have aged like those characters have aged. And to see
Mhm.
Cobra Kai now, thinking of my experience when I watched The Karate Kid, and to see the original people, how they've aged. I mean, I wish more producers out there did that. Honestly,
Mhm.
it's like unheard of, and it's beautiful. It's why it connects so well with people,
They
especially.
brought back the heart of what Karate Kid was.
Exactly. Exactly. Very good. I love that. So let's go. I'm going to ask you a question that I always enjoy asking the guests because it's at the heart of why even do martial arts. Look, I've talked about this before, but I am very lucky that I don't have to fight zombies to buy milk or half and half. Thankfully, I wouldn't want to. I don't want to live in the end of times apocalypse. I want to live in a peaceful time where we have law enforcement and martial arts I use for my own development and to know myself. That's not to say that I don't have practical aspects, but all right. Why would someone do martial art if you have suppose parents that are thinking, should I take my kid to swimming or martial arts, or someone who's been doing this 25 years and all of a sudden they think like, I never use this stuff. Why am I doing it? How do you answer that question to yourself?
Well, if their question is, I've never used this stuff, why am I doing it? Then they're doing something wrong because martial arts is more than just fighting. And there's more reasons to do martial arts than to not, because you're right. We're in a different time. We're not in the end of times, or we're not even hundreds of years ago where we're fighting for our life in a village or with invading villages or a feudal system. We're not experiencing that. At least most of us aren't. And so, yeah. So why do we train every day for combat? Well, because there's more to it than combat. Yes, there's the ability to defend yourself, but there's also just to get stronger. There is to learn culture, to get better coordination, just health. Some people do it for rehab. I know several people who had accidents or had surgeries that were told. I had a colleague, one of my classmates, he as a teenager had cancer in his leg and he had major operation. The doctors weren't even sure they were going to save his leg, and they did, but they said, you're probably never going to walk again. He didn't accept that. He joined martial arts. He did that as his physical therapy. When by the time the school closed, he had earned his third-degree black belt. So I have seen people use it as rehab. Not everyone uses it for fighting. People have back injuries. Well, kata's good for that. Some people just want the culture. Some people just want something to do. They want the camaraderie in the family. So there's unlimited benefits that you can get out of the martial arts. But as far as, oh, I don't use this, well, sure you do, because in our civilization, it's not common, unless you're out there looking for trouble, to come across a situation or an encounter where you have to defend yourself. The more martial arts you learn, you can bring that number down. Like, you want to avoid those situations. So if you're not getting into a fight, if you're not getting into those conflicts, you're using your martial arts. You're still defending yourself by not entering those situations to begin with. And part of that is becoming aware. You're more aware of your body and your surroundings. You watch people, you read situations, and you kind of develop an intuition. And I think a lot of that is developed because of the martial arts, because you're training for awareness, because you're training for precision, that you are more aware. And if there is something that might be developing that you're not comfortable with, you recognize that and you could leave before you have to defend yourself. So you are using your martial arts if you haven't used your martial arts, basically.
Exactly. I love that answer. You know, there's something I haven't thought about this in a long time, but as you were answering, it came back to me. And I'm going to say it, but I apologize. I don't remember the source. But like someone said, it would be like questioning why would someone be a painter, an artist, since the invention of photography. That doesn't happen. It's not like art stopped. It develops your skill, it gives you coordination, it gives you an appreciation for life, and it is used and it auctions for millions of dollars. So there's some value there. So absolutely. In
Exactly.
fact, I like your aspect of we're using it. We're using it constantly. It's just more than combat.
One of my favorite quotes is, the best self-defense technique is the one you don't have to use.
Yes. Yes. And true, martial artists that have had experience for real, they tend to be very aware, very centered. Another reason I do this vlog is to meet those fascinating martial artists like yourself.
I appreciate that.
So Dan, it's been a great honor. I'm going to thank you from the bottom of my heart. We'll wrap it up here, and hopefully we'll bring you back for another collaboration very soon. It will be delightful. But I really am very thankful and honored that you had the time to talk to us today. And I just want to say thank you and wish you the best. I will continue being a big fan of your vlog and directing people there.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute honor to be on the show. I really appreciate what you're doing because you're doing the same message. You're trying to get that unity out there and spreading the positive message. So thank you for what you're doing. And I would be happy to come back. So it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.